The summer sun was dipping low over the small Oregon town, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose. From blocks away, you could smell the sweet tang of barbecue drifting through the air. At the Carter's house, the backyard was already buzzing with voices and the soft clink of glasses. It was the kind of scene that could have been pulled from a family magazine. A wide-trimmed lawn strings of fairy lights swaying gently in the breeze, folding tables loaded with potato salad and corn on the cob. Neighbors and relatives milled about chatting in small circles, laughter rising above the hum of the grill. Emily Carter stepped through the side gate still wearing her veterinary scrubs, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging stubbornly to the fabric. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, a few wisps sticking to her temples from the late afternoon heat. She had come straight from her shift at the animal clinic, because as her father liked to remind her, family gatherings were not optional. She scanned the yard quickly, looking for a place to blend in to disappear. That was when she spotted Monica. Her older sister stood near the drinks table in a fitted red dress that shimmered in the fading light, a diamond pendant catching the glow. Her smile was wide and perfect, the kind that drew people in, but Emily knew that smile. She had been on the receiving end of it too many times to mistake it for warmth. Monica's eyes lit with something sharp when she saw Emily. "Well, look who decided to show up," she called out loud enough for several heads to turn. "Still wearing your work clothes. Guess those dogs and cats keep you too busy for a little effort." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Emily forced a smile, gripping a paper plate a little too tightly as she moved toward the buffet. She told herself to let it slide. Just get through the evening. Monica was already drifting closer, the red of her dress like a warning flag. She leaned in, her voice low, but tinged with mock sweetness. "Remember the game we used to play?" Emily's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what Monica meant. "Don't," Emily murmured, hoping it would be enough. Monica's hand shot out, fingers wrapping around Emily's wrist. It looked casual to anyone glancing over, just two sisters talking. But Emily felt the pressure building, twisting. Pain flared up her arms, sharp and sudden. She tried to pull back, but Monica's grip only tightened. "Come on," Monica cooed. "You used to love this." There was a faint crack, almost drowned out by the chatter around them. But Emily heard it, felt it. The paper plate slipped from her fingers, landing with a muffled thud on the grass. Her breath hitched as she tried to flex her fingers and found them unresponsive. Across the yard, her father Richard was leaning against the grill, tongs in hand. He glanced over, chuckled, and shook his head. "Emily, you always make such a scene," he said as if she had tripped over her own feet. Her mother Diane sat nearby with a glass of wine, her eyes drifting lazily over the guests. She smirked faintly and took a sip, offering no more reaction than if someone had told a dull joke. Monica finally released her wrist, stepping back with a bright, innocent smile. "See nothing to it," she said. Emily cradled her arm against her body, willing herself not to cry. She could feel the throbbing intensify, spreading from her wrist up to her elbow, each pulse a reminder that this was more than the roughhousing her sister liked to call it. The people around them were still laughing, though some looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Emily's face burned not just from the pain, but from the humiliation of knowing that once again she was the punchline in her own family's performance. She told herself to breathe, to stay quiet, because raising her voice would only feed the story they loved to tell about her being too sensitive. But as she stood there, her fingers growing stiff and cold, a whisper of panic edged into her thoughts. Something was wrong. Emily had been here before, not in this exact scene with the fairy lights and the smell of grilled corn, but in this role, the one where she was the lesser daughter. It had been written for her long before she was old enough to understand the lines. Monica was the golden child, the polished one, with perfect grades and a picture-perfect marriage to a wealthy real estate agent. Emily had taken a different path, one that was quieter, less glamorous. She worked long hours at the animal clinic, patching up strays and calming anxious pets, the kind of work that meant everything to her, but nothing to her parents. They measured worth in diplomas on the wall and the size of a wedding ring. She had none of those. Growing up, Emily learned quickly that her value in the family depended on staying agreeable, on laughing when Monica made her the butt of a joke, on shrugging off the little shoves and pinches as harmless fun. When she was younger, She tried to fight back to tell her parents that Monica went too far. The response was always the same. Don't be so sensitive. Your sister is just playing. You need to toughen up. Over time, those words sank deep enough to make her doubt her own pain. Tonight felt different, though, and that difference terrified her. The throbbing in her wrist wasn't fading, and her fingers still refused to move. She could already imagine how the next hour would play out if she followed the old script. She would slip away quietly, drive home with one hand on the wheel, maybe ice the wrist and hope it was just a sprain. In a few days, Monica would call or text something half-hearted like, "Hope your hand's better," and then they'd see each other again at another gathering and it would all start over. But this time the stakes were higher. If she ignored this injury, she might lose more than a few days of comfort. She could lose function in her hand. The work she loved at the clinic depended on her being able to handle frightened animals, steady a syringe, hold delicate instruments. Without that, what would she have left? Even worse than the physical risk was the truth pressing in on her. Letting this slide again meant telling herself her pain didn't matter. It meant teaching Monica and everyone else in the family that she could be hurt without consequence, that she would always take it. She thought of the clients who brought in injured animals and insisted it was nothing only to hear from the vet that the injury was worse than they imagined. She thought of how she would look them in the eye and tell them they had done the right thing by bringing their pet in. And now here she was standing in her parents' backyard with her own body telling her something was wrong, and a lifetime of conditioning telling her to pretend otherwise. For the first time in years, she wondered what would happen if she didn't pretend. Emily's childhood was a series of carefully staged photographs and unspoken rules. From the outside, the Carter family looked like something out of a church bulletin. A handsome father who owned a small hardware store, a graceful mother who chaired charity luncheons, and two daughters who were always dressed neatly for Sunday service. Behind closed doors, the script was different. Monica, 4 years older, had always been the favorite. She was quick with charm, good at school, and knew how to perform for adults. Emily, quieter and more serious, never learned how to compete with that. When she tried it, only seemed to make Monica shine brighter by comparison. One of Emily's earliest memories was from her 10th birthday. She had been so excited when her mother allowed her to invite 3 friends over after school for cake and games. The cake was a simple chocolate sheet cake with her name piped in pale pink icing. She remembered leaning forward to blow out the candles, when suddenly Monica reached across the table, scooped a handful of frosting and smeared it across Emily's face. The frosting stung her eyes, but worse was the sound of everyone laughing. Even her father, holding the camcorder, chuckled and said, "That's sisterly love for you." Emily had smiled because that was what was expected. But inside, something small and fragile had cracked. There was another time in high school when Emily had just come off the stage from receiving an award for perfect attendance. It wasn't a big award, nothing like the academic honors Monica had won, but it mattered to Emily. Before she could even take a photo with her parents, Monica had grabbed the certificate and waved it over her head, announcing to the crowd that it was for showing up and doing the bare minimum. People laughed, and Emily's parents didn't correct her. Instead, her father clapped Monica on the back and said, "That's my girl, always keeping it real." Their mother, Diane, was the quiet enabler in all of this. She never joined in the taunts, but she never stopped them either. Diane's coping mechanism for everything unpleasant was to pour another glass of wine and turn her gaze elsewhere. When Monica teased Emily, Diane would smile faintly, take a sip, and change the subject. Over time, Emily learned that asking her mother for support was like talking to a locked door. There was no point knocking. The Carter family's standing in their small town was built on maintaining a spotless image. They hosted block parties, volunteered at the church fundraiser, and were the first to deliver a casserole when someone in the community was ill. People admired them, and Monica was often held up as an example of how well Richard and Diane had raised their children. That made it harder for Emily to tell anyone what really went on. She doubted anyone would believe her if she said her sister could be cruel, that her father's approval was conditional, that her mother's smiles were just another form of silence. It was easier to believe she was overreacting than to imagine the alternative, that her family's love came with strings she could never untangle. By the time she was in her 20s, Emily had perfected the role of the agreeable younger sister. She laughed at Monica's jabs, brushed off the bruises from playful shoves, and kept her stories to herself. If she complained, the labels came quickly: dramatic, thin-skinned, ungrateful. She told herself it was normal that lots of siblings roughhouse the teasing was just another way of showing affection. But there was a difference between teasing and tearing someone down, and deep down she knew it. The truth was that Monica's behavior had been more than just occasional meanness. It was a pattern, and their parents' response, or lack of it, had taught Emily that the pattern was acceptable. That history had led her to this backyard, this moment, where her wrist throbbed and her family laughed. It had primed her to swallow her protest, to stand still, while Monica inflicted pain under the guise of a game. Yet as she stood there, the ache spreading through her arm, Emily realized that the root of the problem wasn't just Monica's cruelty. It was the system they had all built together, where cruelty could be disguised as love and silence could be passed off as peace. She thought about the neighbors sipping iced tea just a few feet away, seeing only the smiling Carters, and she understood that her family's image was its own form of armor. Breaking that image would be seen as a betrayal, no matter how much truth was behind it. That was why, until now, she had always kept quiet. Tonight, though, the pain in her wrist was a reminder that silence had a cost, and she had been paying it for far too long. The music from the portable speaker mixed with the chatter of guests as the smell of grilled chicken and sweet corn filled the backyard. Emily tried to fade into the background, standing near the drink cooler, and keeping her injured wrist tucked close to her body. She told herself to just get through the evening, but Monica was not finished. From across the yard, Monica's voice carried easily over the noise. "So Em's still spending your days cleaning up after mutts? Must be nice not having a real job with any pressure." A few people chuckled. Others glanced away. Emily pretended to busy herself with a cup of lemonade, but her cheeks were burning. She didn't answer, hoping Monica would get bored and move on. Instead, she felt a presence at her side, the sharp scent of Monica's perfume cutting through the smoky air. "You're awfully quiet," Monica said softly, her tone dripping with mock concern. "What's the matter? Afraid you'll mess up in front of everyone again?" Emily's throat tightened. "I'm fine," she said, keeping her voice low. "Just leave it." But Monica thrived on an audience. She reached for Emily's wrist again, her grip deceptively light at first, then twisting sharply. Emily gasped, the pain shooting up her arm. This time it was not just a crack she heard, but a deep, grinding pop that made her stomach lurch. "Come on," Monica said louder. "Now you used to be able to take it." Across the yard, Richard looked up from the grill. "That's the spirit he called. She needs to toughen up." Diane, seated with a glass of wine in hand, didn't even turn her head. Emily could feel her vision narrowing, the edges darkening as the pain pulsed harder. A few of the guests shifted uncomfortably, their smiles faltering. That was when Emily noticed a woman she didn't recognize watching from near the buffet table. She was in her early 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense posture. The woman set down her plate and stepped closer. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice cutting through the laughter. "We're fine," Monica replied quickly, her grip still tight. "Just playing a game we've played since we were kids." The woman's gaze dropped to Emily's hand. "That's not a game," she said firmly. "Look at her wrist. It's already swelling." Emily blinked, startled by the stranger's certainty. The woman turned toward the group, raising her voice. "Someone needs to call 911. The yard fell quieter, the laughter trailing off into awkward silence. Monica let go of Emily abruptly, stepping back with an exaggerated sigh. "You all are ridiculous," she muttered. Richard waved a dismissive hand. "She's fine. She always acts like this when she wants attention." Diane finally looked over, her eyes glazed and bored. "You're embarrassing yourself, Emily," she said. Emily cradled her wrist, the skin now flushed and tight. The stranger stepped closer, introducing herself as Linda. "Don't move your hand," she instructed gently. "Let's get you seated." Emily allowed Linda to guide her to a chair, though her mind was racing. Part of her wanted to bolt for her car to avoid the scene that was clearly brewing. But another part recognized the rare chance of having someone on her side, someone who seemed to see through the family's facade. The tension in the yard was thick now. Guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to stay or quietly slip away. Linda knelt beside Emily, her voice steady. "I work at the elementary school," she said. "I've seen enough playground injuries to know this isn't minor." Emily could feel the fight between habit and instinct. Habit told her to downplay it to reassure everyone she was fine. Instinct screamed that this was serious, that she needed help, and for once she was not the only one saying so. Linda looked toward the open gate where a few teenagers were lingering with their phones out. You, she called dial 911. Now. One of them hesitated, then began tapping on their screen. Richard set down his tongs and started walking over irritation etched across his face. This is unnecessary, he said. We can put some ice on it and she'll be fine. But Linda didn't back down. You don't decide that, she replied evenly. The paramedics will. Emily sat still, every throb of her wrist echoing the shift in the air. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't entirely alone in the fight. The sound of distant sirens began to weave through the summer air, faint. At first, then growing clearer. Emily sat in the folding chair with her arm cradled to her chest, watching the expressions ripple across the yard. A few guests began to drift toward the fence, pretending to check their phones, while others whispered in low voices. Monica stood with her arms crossed, a smirk plastered on her face like armor. Richard hovered nearby, his jaw tight, glancing toward the street as though hoping the sirens might turn away. Diane swirled the wine in her glass, the ice clinking softly, her face a mask of detached annoyance. Emily's wrist throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Every small movement sent a sharp spike of pain shooting up her arm. Linda stayed close, kneeling beside her chair, her presence steady. Just focus on breathing, she said quietly. They'll be here soon. Emily nodded, but her mind was swirling. She thought about the animals she had treated at the clinic. The way some limped in with injuries that had clearly been there for days, their owners insisting it was nothing. She had never judged them for waiting. She understood the human instinct to hope a problem would just fade away. But she also knew the danger of that hope. The paramedics arrived, two figures in navy uniforms moving quickly through the gate with a stretcher. One, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, knelt beside Emily. I'm Jenna, she said. Can you tell me what happened? Before Emily could speak, Richard cut in. It was a silly game between sisters. She overreacted. We don't need all this. Jenna's eyes didn't leave Emily's face. Can you move your fingers for me? Emily tried, willing them to bend, but they stayed rigid as though they belonged to someone else. No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jenna looked at her partner, then back to Emily. We need to get you to the ER, she said. It could be a fracture. We'll immobilize your wrist for transport. Monica rolled her eyes. Unbelievable, she muttered. She's always been like this. Linda stood up sharply. She's hurt and you need to stop talking, she said, her voice firm enough to draw stares. Richard took a step forward. You have no right to talk to us like that in our home. Jenna glanced over her shoulder. Right now, our priority is the patient, she said evenly. We'll talk about the rest later. Emily felt the cool embrace of the splint as Jenna secured her arm. The reality of the moment pressed in on her. She was leaving the backyard not on her own 2 feet, but on a stretcher. As they lifted her, the conversations around her seemed to fade into a dull hum. She caught glimpses of faces, some curious, some pitying, some disapproving. The ride to the ER was a blur of passing houses, and the rhythmic thump of her own pulse in her ears. Linda had insisted on riding in the ambulance, sitting in the small seat by Emily's head. You're going to be okay, she said softly, and something in her tone made Emily believe it for just a second. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt harsh after the warm glow of the backyard. The antiseptic smell was sharp, clean, almost overwhelming. A nurse guided the stretcher into a curtained bay, asking questions about pain levels and medical history. Emily answered mechanically, her mind still tethered to the image of her parents' faces, as she was wheeled out of their yard. Dr. Mason entered, a tall man with kind eyes and a brisk manner. We're going to get some x-rays, he said. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with. Emily nodded, too tired to argue. When the images came back, Dr. Mason studied them in silence for a moment before looking up. You have a fracture in your distal radius, he said. That's the bone near your wrist. We're going to need to set it and put you in a cast. He hesitated. I'm also seeing signs of previous injury in the same area. Can you tell me about that? Emily blinked. I don't know. Maybe from years ago, Richard's voice cut in from behind the curtain. She's always been clumsy, trips over her own feet. Diane's voice followed, tinged with impatience. She bruises if you look at her too hard. This is just a waste of time. Dr. Mason's expression didn't change. We're going to involve law enforcement, he said calmly. Multiple injuries in different stages of healing are concerning. Emily's breath caught. The words felt like they had weight, like they would change something fundamental. A uniformed man stepped into the bay, Detective Harris. He introduced himself. He pulled up a chair, his notebook balanced on his knee. Emily, I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight, he said. Emily glanced at Linda, who was standing just inside the curtain, her presence like a steady anchor. She grabbed my wrist. Emily began, her voice shaking, twisted it. It's not the first time. The admission felt strange on her tongue, like speaking a secret she had kept too long. Harris nodded slowly. We'll need to get statements from witnesses, he said. Richard stepped forward. This is a family matter. We don't need the police involved. Harris's gaze didn't waver. When there's evidence of repeated injury, it's not just a family matter. It's a legal one. Emily looked down at her immobilized wrist. She thought about all the times she had walked away in silence, all the times she had convinced herself it was better not to stir up trouble. The silence had protected her family's image, but it had never protected her. Harris closed his notebook. We'll take it from here, he said, his tone final. And for the first time in years, Emily felt the faint stirrings of a different kind of safety. Not the fragile kind that came from pretending nothing was wrong, but the sturdier kind that came from being seen. The curtain around Emily's hospital bay shifted as Detective Harris stepped out to speak with Dr. Mason, leaving Emily with Linda and the low hum of voices from the hallway. Emily stared at the ceiling tiles, feeling the weight of what had just been set in motion. She had not planned on this. All she wanted was for the pain to stop, for the night to end without another fight. But now it felt like the entire trajectory of her life was tilting in a new direction. Linda leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Emily with an expression that was both gentle and resolute. I've seen enough kids come through my school with stories that didn't add up, she said softly. I'm not letting them talk you out of this. Emily swallowed hard. You don't even know me, she murmured. Linda's voice didn't waver. I know what I saw tonight, and I know the look in someone's eyes when they're used to not being believed. The truth of that statement sat heavy between them. Outside the curtain, Richard's voice rose sharp and impatient. You can't just accuse us of something without proof. This is ridiculous. Diane's voice followed, lower but dripping with scorn. She has always wanted to make herself the victim. She thrives on it. Harris re-entered, his notepad in hand, his expression calm but firm. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I'll need your statements as part of the investigation. This isn't optional. Richard scoffed, muttering something about overreach. Harris turned back to Emily. There are a couple of witnesses willing to talk. We'll also be collecting any video footage from tonight. I'm going to be honest with you, if we can establish a pattern, this will become a criminal case. Emily's chest tightened. A criminal case. The word sounded foreign, almost too big to attach to her family. Harris nodded. That decision won't be on you alone. The evidence will speak for itself. Linda stepped forward. I have no problem giving a statement, she said. And I know at least 2 people had their phones out when it happened. Emily's mind flashed to the group of teenagers by the gate. She remembered their phones raised the glint of a screen catching the light. She had assumed they were just filming the party for social media, but maybe without realizing it, they had caught the truth. Harris made a quick note. We'll follow up on that. He looked directly at Emily. I need you to understand something. They're going to push back. They're going to make you feel like you're the one who's done something wrong. That's how this works when people are used to controlling the story. Emily thought of her father's dismissive wave, her mother's smirk, Monica's confident laugh. He was right. She could already hear their voices in her head telling her she was dramatic, ungrateful, disloyal. I don't want to ruin the family, she said quietly. Harris's reply was steady. You didn't ruin anything. The choices that got us here were theirs. All you're doing is telling the truth. The door to the bay opened again, and a nurse stepped in with a clipboard. We're ready to get you into a cast, she said. Emily followed her into the procedure room, Linda trailing close behind. As the nurse prepared the materials, Emily watched the plaster bandage being dipped in water, then wrapped carefully around her wrist. The snug pressure was oddly comforting, a reminder that something broken could be held together long enough to heal. Linda rested a hand lightly on Emily's shoulder. "You're not alone in this," she said. And though Emily's stomach churned with fear about what would come next, a small part of her began to believe that maybe for once, she wasn't. Back in the sterile quiet of the hospital consultation room, Emily sat upright with her newly cast wrist resting on the table Detective Harris across from her, with a calm, reassuring presence. He placed a folder on the table thick with documents and photos. "Emily, we've gathered statements from several guests who witnessed the incident tonight. Some of them recorded parts of the event on their phones." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "They actually recorded it?" she asked, disbelief mixing with a flicker of hope. Harris nodded. "Yes. The videos clearly show Monica grabbing and twisting your wrist while your parents look on without intervening." The evidence felt surreal in her hands, a tangible proof of what she had spent years trying to explain. "And that's not all," Harris continued. "We also have medical reports from Dr. Mason showing multiple injuries at different stages of healing." Emily's heart pounded as the walls around her seemed to shrink, compressing the moment into something that felt both terrifying and liberating. Monica's smug confidence at the party seemed miles away now. Harris explained the next steps: they would file formal charges, and Emily would need to testify. He assured her that the prosecution had a strong case. Over the next few days, Emily worked with a victim advocate who helped her prepare for what would come. The nights were restless. She relived moments of doubt, wondering if she was doing the right thing, if the family she had known would truly turn against her. The first hearing was nerve-wracking. The courtroom was cold and unfamiliar. But Emily found strength in the presence of Linda, who came every day to support her. Monica's defense tried to paint Emily as unstable, desperate for attention. But the videos told a different story. The prosecution showed the footage to the jury, the clear twist of the wrist, the laughter of the onlookers, her father's applause. The courtroom fell silent. Witnesses who had been hesitant before now spoke with clarity about the ongoing pattern of abuse. When it was Emily's turn, she took a deep breath and recounted the years of dismissals, the bruises hidden beneath sleeves, the emotional scars that ran deeper than any fracture. Her voice shook, but she spoke with a quiet determination. "I am not here for revenge," she said. "I am here to say that no one deserves to be hurt and ignored by their own family." As the trial progressed, the community began to take sides. Some expressed shock. Others quietly supported Emily. The Carters' carefully constructed image began to crumble. Monica's confidence waned with each new piece of evidence. Finally, the verdict came. Monica was found guilty of aggravated assault. Emily sat quietly as the judge sentenced her sister to 3 years in prison. Relief and sorrow tangled together within her. The fight back had been brutal, but justice was being served. And for the first time, Emily felt the burden of silence lift. The day the police came to the Carter house was marked by a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to cling to every surface. Word had spread quickly through the small town, and neighbors gathered at a cautious distance, whispering behind curtains and on porches. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street in urgent colors as officers approached the front door with purposeful steps. Emily stood on the edge of the driveway, her arm still in a cast, surrounded by Linda and Detective Harris. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Richard's face was flushed with anger as he swung the door open before the officers could even knock. "You have no right to barge into my home," he bellowed, his voice carrying down the quiet block. Diane followed, her expression carefully composed, but eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is a witch hunt," she declared loudly, glaring at Emily as if she were the accused. Monica trailed behind them, arms crossed, her smirk replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The officers ignored the outburst and moved inside. Detective Harris calmly explained the purpose of their visit: the execution of an arrest warrant for Monica Carter on charges of aggravated assault. Monica's face hardened, and she straightened her shoulders defiantly. "You're making a mistake," she said, but the wavering in her voice betrayed her confidence. As the officers placed handcuffs on Monica's wrists, the gathered crowd gasped. Some neighbors looked away, others whispered words of shock or sympathy. Emily felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. This was her sister, the girl she had grown up with, the girl she had once believed would protect her. Now that belief lay shattered along with the fragile peace of their family. Richard paced the floor shouting accusations and threats, but no one paid him much attention. Diane clung to the wall, her poised mask finally slipping into a weary frown. Outside, the local news vans began to arrive, and reporters hurried to capture the unfolding drama. Emily found herself pulled into interviews, her voice steady but quiet, as she told the truth about the years of pain and denial. The community's reaction was mixed. Some expressed support, recognizing the courage it took to break the silence. Others whispered about the shame brought upon a once respected family. In the weeks that followed, Monica's absence was felt in both tangible and invisible ways. The household lost its usual energy, replaced by a hollow quiet. Richard and Diane retreated further into themselves, their public smiles growing thinner. For Emily, the legal consequences were just the beginning of a long journey. She grappled with the fractures left by years of emotional neglect and the complicated feelings that came with watching a sister she had once loved face punishment. But she also found strength in the knowledge that her story had finally been heard, that her pain was no longer invisible. The consequences for Monica were real and unavoidable, and for the first time Emily knew that justice was not just a word but a possibility. 2 years had passed since that difficult summer night when Emily's world had shifted forever. Now living in Portland, she had carved out a new life for herself, one filled with purpose and healing. The small apartment she rented was modest, but filled with light and warmth, a far cry from the cold tension of her childhood home. Emily worked as a counselor at a local nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors of domestic abuse. Each day she sat with women whose stories echoed her own, offering empathy and guidance. The scars she carried were both visible and invisible, a reminder of her past and a testament to her resilience. Linda had become more than a friend. She was family in every sense. Their bond had grown through late-night talks, shared laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. Emily often thought about how a stranger's kindness had been the catalyst for her journey toward freedom. Monica remained incarcerated, serving her sentence for aggravated assault. Emily heard updates occasionally through the legal system, each one a confirmation that justice had been served, but also a reminder of the complicated emotions tied to family. Her parents had mostly withdrawn from contact, their relationship with Emily fractured beyond repair. The townspeople's whispers followed her occasionally, but Emily no longer felt the need to hide or shrink away. She had reclaimed her voice in her story. Sometimes on cold or rainy days her wrist would ache, a dull reminder of the past, but those moments no longer defined her. They were part of the tapestry of survival and strength she wore proudly. Emily often reflected on how far she had come. The timid, silenced girl who once endured pain alone had grown into a woman who fought for truth and justice. She knew her path was not typical, but she embraced it fully, using her experiences to light the way for others. It was in this role that Emily found true healing, not by forgetting what had happened, but by transforming her pain into a powerful force for change. Each step forward was a victory over the shadows of her past. In quiet moments, she would hold the hospital wristband from that night, the small plastic loop that symbolized the beginning of her freedom. It was a talisman against doubt and fear, a reminder that she had survived and could thrive. Emily's story was no longer one of silence and suffering. It was a story of courage, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit. Emily sat at her small kitchen table, the morning sun casting soft stripes across the worn wood. In front of her lay a recording device, its red light blinking steadily as she prepared to share a message she hoped would reach those still trapped in silence. Her voice was calm, but firm as she spoke into the microphone. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, or that your pain isn't real, I want you to know you're not alone. She paused, gathering strength from the memories that had brought her here. Family doesn't have to mean silence. Sometimes family is the people who choose to stand with you, who believe you when no one else does. She talked about the importance of seeking help, of trusting yourself, and of breaking free from cycles of abuse. When she finished, Emily smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She knew the road ahead wasn't always easy, but for the first time she was walking it on her own terms. The recording ended, and she reached for her phone to upload it to a support group platform. As the upload completed, Emily looked out the window and breathed in deeply. She was enough. She always had been.